Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's Contract Administration Practice Group call. Today we will continue in our top 10 best practices in the Construction Contract Administration Countdown. Today is number 7. Please remember that number 10, 9, and 8 are already uploaded and available on the CSI YouTube channel, so feel free to check those out and get caught up if you haven't been into any of our other previous sessions. With that, I do want to hand it over to Jim and Douglas to get started with today's session. So Doug and Jim, over to you.
All right, Matthew, thank you very much. Go ahead, Doug.
Saying thank you to Matthew and welcoming everyone.
We're glad to have everybody, and as Matthew has said, if we take a look at the first slide here, this is an attempt at plagiarizing Mr. Letterman in the top 10. And we call this the top 10 construction contract administration best practices. And that's sort of how we have formatted the presentation. And we are today looking at number 7. But let's take a look at the next slide and just touch a second on what we have done so far. Best practice number 10 was having fun, being sure that you allocate time for that within your firm. Don't forget to do that, because if you don't plan for it, it may not happen. It won't happen. Best practice number 9 was remember your pants pocket. And we spoke about quality control and quality assurance on jobs and how it's easy to save money that you haven't spent yet by being sure that you've got a well-coordinated set of documents. Best practice number 8, teamwork creates winners, and finding ways to communicate on your job and connect with the team to work in a focused direction forward. So those are the first 3 that we went over. And Matthew, the next slide, our presentation today is best practice number 7, which is to hold costs in check. So before we start there, Doug, is there anything you wanted to add about what we've done so far?
No, Jim, just a reminder to everyone that if you missed any of the previous 3, they are available on the YouTube page.
That's right. And also, please interrupt us, raise your hand, and pose a question to Matthew. These sessions are really good when we get a lot of feedback, and we certainly want you to feel comfortable to participate and to dig right in. So Matthew, let's take a look at the next slide. And the question is, does the term pay me now or pay me later ring any bells to you? And if you take a close look at the cartoon, you can see that the box holding the original contract is pretty small, and the change order box is piled pretty deep. So let's take a look at the next slide. Doug and I spend a lot of time talking about planning and upfront time investing. It's a thing. And planning for the CA phase to us is like money in the bank. When you are organized in your attempt upfront, it certainly saves office time, which equals money for you. We're going to touch on some of these things. It certainly saves in field time, which is money to you. It absolutely builds goodwill and close relationships with your contractor. Certainly has the opportunity to be real money to you. And it builds a tighter bond with your client, something that they will not soon forget, which is, to us, the easiest and most inexpensive marketing money that you can spend, keeping the client that you have. And just to touch on that a second, I think often we think about the construction process, the design process, even the terms that we use in a way that is a bit too general, and we feel like most people understand that language when they don't. We find that clients are often terrified of the circumstances they're in and the whole complicated process to go through, from conceiving a project to moving into a new project. So this opportunity for you to spend time with them and sort of handhold them through the process can be very important. Doug, is there anything you want to touch on?
No, nothing to add at this point.
Okay. Well, Matthew, let's go to the next slide and touch on some of the opportunities in the office to hold your project costs in check. First is for us to touch on procedures and what you might do as a firm. Absolutely, we encourage you to establish your office procedures, and once you have established them, then be absolutely sure that you follow them. There are certainly firms that exist that have very detailed firm operational procedures and manuals. CSI publishes a practice guide, the Construction Contract Administration Practice Guide, which has a chapter dedicated to establishing a process and a procedure, and actually has a lot of information in there to support how to organize that. Also, along with that practice guide, there are downloadable documents that support that established procedure. So things that you may use, that you may find helpful in your firm. Doug, I guess I'll stop with each of these and see, or you jump in and add any items that you feel like are that expand on these.
Okay. Well, I think it is very important to have your procedures established and to follow them. It creates a level of expectation for the entire team, including the contractor and the owner, when those ground rules and when you establish the ground rules up front early on in the project, and everybody knows what to expect, and then they see that you are maintaining that throughout the project, it helps in understanding what's coming and how to deal with things. So establishing those procedures up front, I think, is very important. Jim and I often talk about doing that and having your pre-construction conferences and laying out the game rules and following those game rules so that everybody knows what the expectations are, what's expected of them, and what they can expect of others throughout the construction process. I think that is key, and I think it will save you time, and as we all know, time is money, so the end result is that it will help save not only you, but also the owner and the contractor. Moving on to the next one, Jim, if you don't mind, communicating frequently with the team. That is another key point that Jim and I often talk about. Communication is probably the key issue when things go bad. You can probably point back in some manner or fashion that communication has something to do with it. So communicating with the entire team, your consultants, your owner, your contractor, end users, maintenance people at a facility. Keep that communication open, do it often, and be honest about it. Jim?
That's right, absolutely. You can't communicate too much, and as Doug said, it certainly saves time when people aren't surprised. Then that's a good thing. And in that communication and with a list of those folks that Doug just mentioned, you will have meetings, whether they're in your office or not, whether they're planning meetings or pre-construction meetings or pre-installation meetings or pre-enclosure visits where folks that are expected to maintain facilities have the opportunity to see what's in the wall. Have those meetings as often, but only as is necessary to update what what your goals are for the project and update your plan. Not the contract documents. I don't mean that when it says to update and plan, but to organize your efforts moving forward as a team. And you have established critical milestones within how you want to manage the job in your office. These may be very different than a construction schedule. So, for example, you may establish a milestone of when you hope to conclude your shop drawing review phase, which is a very organized effort. We often talk about how things have changed in the construction community these days, and that the buyout of projects seems to be moving deeper and deeper into the job. There may be an opportunity for you to help move that along and conclude that part of the project earlier. Certainly, we both have been associated with projects that, for example, collected submittal information until all of the options were submitted, so that you go through the color finishes selection process once instead of several times. So there are some of those kind of milestones that you may visit with the team and revisit and make adjustments as you need to, and then communicate with everyone any changes that have occurred, either with your team, with the construction team, or with the owner's team. Doug, any things to throw into that mix? Or Matthew, any hands raised?
Yeah, we actually had two questions come in here. The first one comes in from Joseph. He's wondering what portion of the AE fee should be allocated for the CA phase.
I love the question because it's one we struggle with all the time. And Doug and I are proponents of as much as possible, but I'll say, for example, and Doug, I'll say this quick and then I'll hush and let you respond. In North Carolina, when you do work for the state construction office, so any facility that is built with public funds that is owned by the state, they assign a percentage. And they assign 25% for the construction administration phase. And now there are phases on either side of that for bidding and negotiating and for project closeout, but the actual percentage for the CA phase itself is 25%. Doug and I both believe that is woefully underfunded as a percentage based on how much time and effort is spent today on a project site. That seems too small. But that's a state construction job with a very complicated process and management procedures through the state. So that's not private work or developer-driven work. Doug, what do you think?
It's never enough. I seem to recall that traditionally you would see 10%, and I hope this all adds up to 100%. I'm going to recall 10% for SD, 15% for DD, 25% for CD, 5% for bidding and negotiation, and then 40% for CA. That seems to ring a bell to me in terms of what I used to see quite often in contracts. 40% I would hope would be enough, but I think when you are trying to determine that for your firm, you need to look at your history, look at your past performance, and base it on what it actually takes your firm to do CA. If you do a good job in the phases preceding it, then perhaps you can get away with a little bit less time in CA because you're not responding to as many RFIs. You've already selected colors, and the colors and the products are specified in the specifications, so you're not having to go through a color review process during the construction phase. You've done that already. You've got to consider those things when you're trying to plan fee-wise how much fee to allocate for CA. It seems in my lifetime that by the time you get to CA, you're kind of dealing with what's left over. You signed a contract, it's got a fixed fee, and it may have taken you a little bit longer in the design phase than you had anticipated for schematics and then for design development. And the CDs may take a little bit longer, and so while you had anticipated that you would have 35% of your fee left for CA, when you look at it, you're actually down to 20%. So it's all in the planning and controlling the costs. It starts day one. I mean, the heading up for this session was control the cost, but you got to do that with day one. You can't do it starting at CA. You got to control it throughout the process. And if you are managing your hours and your fee properly, and you're able to meet those deadlines and those goals in terms of hours that you're going to spend in each phase, when you get to the CA phase, then you should have an adequate amount there to cover the services that you need to provide for construction administration. And this is talking a typical design bid build scenario. There are other delivery methods out there where the amount of fee and the amount of time that you would put forth in the CA effort would vary. Design build being one, integrated project delivery using a BIM model with integrated project delivery would be another one where I would expect that you would need to adjust the fee and the amount of time that you would anticipate having for the construction administration phase. So I don't know that that's a definitive answer saying it should be X. I don't know that there is a definitive answer. Again, I think it's kind of a case-by-case basis, a firm-by-firm basis, and a project-by-project basis. Some projects would require more effort than others.
All right. Matthew, did you have another question?
Yeah, there's another question for clarification indicated here. Wondering if they had heard you correctly in saying buyout of the project, and if so, can you help explain what that might actually be?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Matthew. Say that again?
Sure. There was a question that came in here asking if they had heard correctly when I believe it was you had mentioned something about buyout of the project. I wanted to know if they heard that correctly. If so, what is that? That was a term that I had not heard before.
Yes. See, there I go again, doing what I just said a minute ago and using terminology, and I apologize. I should explain that. One of the steps and that's a really good question, one of the steps that the contractor goes through is they define that many times as buyout, but that is the process of them negotiating their final subcontracts with all of the folks that they have used in assembling their bid. So, as Doug said, we decided long ago to pick one delivery type to sort of center these presentations around. And both of us are most familiar with design, bid, build. So that's sort of the nucleus of what we talk about. And in that process, the general contractor would submit their bid based on receiving bids from various subs. But for those of you that have been in a contractor's office on bid day, it's a lot like pandemonium and chaos. So when they are decided to be the successful low bidder, then they go through a process of going back through their bids from their subs, being sure that there aren't exclusions or qualifications, and actually negotiating their final contracts with all of those subcontractors or material providers. For example, steel, they may then go back through and sign the purchase orders at the end of that phase to actually get everything under contract necessary to put the project together. So that would be the buyout phase. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next couple of slides. These will be quick ones to get us to our next area of focus. So in the process of what you're doing in your office, there's some questions that come to mind. How quickly are you being responsive to the general contractor or to your client? We often get under the gun for other projects to get through the office, and so it's important to be responsive, and we've talked about how that saves money. But also, don't stop doing quality control and quality assurance just because the project has been bid and it is successfully under contract. You should continue to go back through your documents and do the quality control, quality assurance process. We would hope that would be one of those things that you have a procedure for in your firm, and it should continue through construction. There are often opportunities found in the process of going through shop drawings or submittals where you can catch things that need to be caught and corrected. So those are opportunities that you should have underway in the office that can help hold the costs to your firm in check. Matthew, let's look at the next slide. And certainly projects develop a momentum. We all see that happen, and so are you doing your part to keep that forward momentum moving and not delaying the project with a lack of response or a slow application for payment, a slow turnaround on questions or processing change orders? You know, what does that end up costing your client in the end if it slows them down getting into a facility? And for those of you that do retail work, you understand how critical it is to hit an opening date. So those are other opportunities that in the office you can stay on top of. Let's take a look at the next slide, Matthew. But, you know, too frequently we've done all we can to plan, and this is what Doug was touching on just a minute ago, and we get to the construction administration phase, and it's like Doug said, we're planning for what's left. Instead of having that percentage of the fee set aside that may have gotten eaten up because we didn't scope well or because the owner changed things too frequently. Well, let's stop with that second one there for a second. And, you know, we often find that we are upside down, that we have spent fee that we didn't anticipate spending, that we change things too often. And where does that leave us? Well, certainly depends on our contract between our firm and the owner. But where is it that we get a chance to stop and say, hold on, you know, we've gone beyond what we were planning here. Let's talk about additional services with your owner. I'll just jump quickly back, and then I want to let Doug have a chance to speak here. I'll jump quickly back to the word communication. This is not something that should come as a surprise to your client because you've been communicating along the way about things that may have been taking a different tack than you were anticipating with your original fee. So communication is important, but Doug and I both find often that the folks that we're working with are just too shy, too scared, too timid to ask for monies that they really are due and can easily document they should receive. Doug, you want to elaborate?
Well, I think that the time to go to your owner and have that discussion is before you provide those additional services. You need to have that courtesy to where he knows that if he's asking you to do something that's beyond the scope of the work, that he's informed of that ahead of time and he has the opportunity to just say, yes, I agree, I'm going to pay for it. You guys negotiate a price and you move down the road, as opposed to coming back after you've done it and then saying, well, okay, you asked for a redesign of half the building. Here it is. It's going to cost you another X amount of dollars. So you need to have that conversation up front. You come to it after the fact and it creates issues for you, and it could create issues for you in terms of you getting paid, and it could create issues for the owner as well. So don't be afraid to have those discussions, have them early rather than later. And I wanted to harp back on a point that Jim made a couple of slides ago about continuing on with your QC after the projects have been bid and into the construction and during the construction phase. A brief story, a project that I was working on, the design team had done their work. We put it out to bid. I was coming more into play as the role of the construction contract administrator and got an RFI early on in the project and took it back to the project architect to get his input on it. And what it was some information lacking in the documents. And when I went back to him, he looked at me and said, I was wondering when they were going to ask that question. And I thought to myself, well, if you knew there was a hole in the documents, why didn't you address it? And we had this conversation. I had the conversation with him. Why didn't you address it? It wasted time in the contractor trying to find the information that wasn't there. It wasted time in me trying to find the information that wasn't there, trying to work through an issue, and then him at that point having to stop what he was doing, regroup, refamiliarize himself with what was going on with the project to produce a document, a little sketch to fill in the hole that he knew was there. While had that been done while either the project was out to bid or even after it was bid, if it was during bidding, we could have addressed it with a addendum and gotten it included in the documents, which would have avoided a change order for the owner. Or he could have done it even if it was after the project was bid, and it would have saved the time and effort of the contractor, myself, and him having to regroup. So, again, time is money. Do that QC. If you know there's something that's missing, go ahead and address it sooner rather than later. Don't wait and see if somebody's going to ask the question. You know the question's coming. Go ahead and address it and get things taken care of sooner again rather than later. Because the longer you wait, the chances that it's going to have a detrimental effect, time-wise and money-wise, increases exponentially. So Matthew, let's take a break and see if we've got questions from anyone.
No, the audience has been kind of quiet on the last couple of slides, so I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to talk about, or we can probably move on to the next slide.
Yeah, let's do that. So we've chatted a little here about what kinds of things can hold project costs in check and save the firm money in the office. Let's jump into some that we can talk about that go on once you're in the field. And one of those first ones that we've been touching on already is communication. Communicating with the team while you're in the field about what their next plan is, what's the next activity, what is the forward progress of the project, what are you, Ms. Superintendent, what are you planning to do next? What is your game plan for this week or next week? And what is it that I might be able to do in being proactive to plan for that, to respond to something that perhaps you need from me or from the owner, from anyone on the team. There are frequently small look-ahead schedules that I have found to be extremely helpful, not only for the planning by the construction community, but for my planning and the firm's planning as well. We know when we need to have documents turned around. We know when we need to have documents out and back to the field. We know when we need to have particular individuals associated with our owner, with our client, available to look at things or be involved with things, particularly if there are issues that have been run into on the project and other consultants are involved, testing agencies or other experts that might need to be there as a part of that group to figure out where we go next. So, Doug, you want to add any to that?
I like to be proactive. Just in all caps. I kind of touched on what I was saying before. And the 2-week look ahead or the short schedule look ahead. I know one thing that I typically do during construction meetings is have the contractor give that 2-week look ahead report. And we do that with the owners present, the design team consultants present. It's like the typical OAC meetings, so that everybody can start thinking about, okay, what do I need to do? Because he's going to be doing this next week. How is that going to impact me? And being proactive, aggressively solving problems, getting on stuff as soon as possible is just does a world of good when you're dealing with construction. Next slide, Matthew.
Well, hang on before you go any further, Matthew. One of the things that here at the bottom that I want to touch on too is about the movement of money and the processing of the applications. I said that for a second, but back in the office, one of the things that I touched on in a slide there is being proactive in processing applications for payment. Because of the way the construction industry is set up today, where there are multiple contracts that the general contractor holds, and these are not individuals that are employees, but they are subs to the contractor. The movement of money, when it's appropriate, when the application has been verified as correct, so don't, let me talk about the paying piece before I talk about the verifying piece. But the movement of the money to the general contractor so that she or he can move that to the sub-construction community is critical to their ability to deliver on milestones, to hit targets in the schedule. You have a role in that as the designer to, let me jump backwards now and say, do the review of the application to be sure that it's accurate, looking at your contract documents and being sure that they are that they're appropriate. So let's go to the next slide because it begins to touch on that. That you have gone closely through that pay application and you have verified that it's accurate, that it is following your contract documents as far as percentages of completed work in place. Matthew, you want to go to the next?
Yeah, I was just going to check. We had a couple of questions that came in. Do you want to go to the next slide first and then?
Yeah. No, let's pick them now.
Okay, great. So the first question we had here from Ken was just more or less like a comment or recommendation. He just said he always recommends following up verbal discussion in the field with a contractor with communication afterwards, which I think kind of goes to some of the conversations we've had as a group here in the past. But then we had Sean ask the question, do you hire outside help, i.e. building envelope consultants to assist you with QA/QC review in the field? If so, have you found these folks helpful?
Let me start, Jim, and I'll start with the first comment. I agree. Jim and I have often said that, especially when you are directing or making some kind of a affirmative action with discussions out in the field, that you always need to follow it up with documentation in writing. That is so important for a whole host of reasons that we could spend a session talking just about documenting conversations. So I'm not going to go into that anymore today. We've talked about it several times in the past, but that is a good point that was raised, that you need to document those conversations. And methods to doing it is noting it in the field review that you had the conversation and this is what the outcome was. Or if necessary, in coming back and doing a separate memo or a letter or an email, or depending on what the topic of the subject was, it may be that you need to do an ASI. But whatever the documentation form needs to take, that's very important. And to the second point, as an architect, I have never hired a building enclosure consultant. I did work on a project once where it was a CM at risk situation, and we were acting as a team. It was not an adversarial relationship. And during the discussions during the design phase, it was decided that a building enclosure consultant was going to be hired. And the contractor was the one that was pushing for it. And so the owner did agree, and one was hired. I think that they were helpful to an extent. When we got to the point where we were doing a mock-up in the field, they were willing to relax some of the design details that we had in the documents, and as the architect, we had to step up and say, no, we don't agree. We're not going to relax the requirement. So I think if you're going to use them, you need to know who they are, know their qualifications, feel comfortable with them, have them be a part of the team. But I don't know that I would say it's necessary. I think if you as an architect, and I guess it's been something that I focused on throughout my career is building enclosure. So I feel comfortable enough in what I know about building enclosure, the training that I've had, where I don't know that I necessarily need a building enclosure consultant, but I certainly at all times welcome another pair of eyes to look at what I'm doing and provide input and guidance. And we talked about this in the past too, about checking your own documents, and that's something that I would always encourage you to not do, is check your own documents. So it's good to have them. I don't know that it's critical, and I just think that you need to be careful in selecting who you use, as I have come across some that don't know as much as I would expect them to know, for them to be holding themselves out to be building enclosure consultants. Jim?
It's a great question to follow right along the lines of holding costs. I have seen where clients wanted that consultant, and so they asked for it, but it's also an opportunity, I think, for us as the designer to say, I have an idea. I'm not sure what you're going to pay for that consultant, but let's for a minute talk about us providing a more enhanced construction administration service where we are on the project more often than is our typical procedure in our office. If you have the expertise, if you're like Doug just said and you're comfortable with doing that, it certainly is an opportunity for you to have that as an option where you might be able to get a better fee for more time on the job. And then conversely, if you don't feel that you have that expertise, it might be a real option for you to get someone, as Doug said, that you have a resume for and a history for and understand to be what they say they are. And it's an opportunity for you to be mentored and learn. So it might go either way there. Matthew, you have others?
Yeah, we did. We had an additional question here. Who documents the meetings? Takes the meeting minutes. Would that be you? Would that be the contractor? Would you both do it and compare notes? What kind of feedback do you have on that concept?
That's a great question. I'll go real quick and then let Doug go. But for me, I want to produce those minutes. I like to capture the information that's shared. It's difficult to do that sometimes while you're chairing the meeting. You may have someone go with you. It's a great opportunity to mentor other people in the firm through the process of CA. But I also ask, and most of the time am allowed to tape, not to do anything except just confirm that I get the notes right. Doug, how about you?
I agree. I would rather be the one responsible for the meeting minutes in most cases. I've been on projects where it's been the contractor, where it's been the architect, where it's been a person that was just there to do meeting minutes. I've also had situations where both the architect and the contractor have done the minutes, or do them rather combined, and they'll compare notes and issue one set of meeting minutes. So a lot of it might depend on the type of project that you're doing. I think in my experience I've seen where it is a CM project, typically then the CM is the one doing the minutes. If it's a design bid build, typically then it's the architect doing the minutes. So it might depend upon the contractual relationship and the arrangement that's set up in the documents. So you need to look to your documents. If it's something that you would prefer to do, then you can state in your documents that you would be doing that. If it's something that you would prefer that the contractor do, again, as the author of the documents, you can put that as a requirement in your front-end document. So as long as the minutes are being recorded and they're accurate and complete, I don't know that it matters too much who is the one that's actually doing the recording, but if I'm doing it, then I know that they're going to be complete and accurate. And if someone else is doing it, then I know I'm going to need to go back and check and read them over to make sure that they are complete and accurate. And that would be something that I would advise everyone to review meeting minutes, even if you've prepared them yourself, to make sure that they are complete and accurate record of the events and discussions that occurred during the meeting.
That's a good comment. Matthew, any others?
Yeah, we've actually got quite a few more coming in here. So let's see here.
That's good.
Next one we have coming in here is, what was your feeling about unapproving an item from a past pay app?
Oh, I love that. That is absolutely permissible. It's certainly something that you don't want to have to find yourself doing, but your general conditions of your contract, if you're using AIA documents, for example, and I believe that EJ CDC documents say the same thing, that if there needs to be an adjustment for something that's discovered after the application is processed, then that is certainly an adjustment that you are expected to make. And of course, hopefully it's less than the payment due, so that there are monies there that you can make that adjustment with. And I've been in that circumstance myself. So it's a process of marking up the pay application to a new amount due and processing it like that. But I should let you go first on that one. I couldn't help myself.
You covered it fine. Other questions, Matthew?
Yeah, I'm just scrolling through to make sure we don't have any that overlap here. Speaking from the owner's view, I also prefer the AE to publish the meeting minutes. Contractors have a habit of slanting the minutes. It's a comment coming in here from Sam, so just following up from that previous question we had. From the check the front end, sometimes the spec lays out who does what in regards to minutes as well, is another comment that came in here from Bob. Here's one. What is the suggested site visit frequency for the design professional? AIA contracts are not specific, but allow for identifying number of site visits. Recognizing that the need to visit the site is directly related to the construction progress, this has direct impact on the CA phase and fee. So I guess how many times do you recommend visits, or is that more of a case-by-case basis?
Doug, I'll let you go. These are great questions.
I think it's a case-by-case basis. It's going to depend on the type of project. It's going to depend on the construction schedule. It's going to depend on whether or not you have a relationship with the contractor. It could depend on whether or not you have a good working relationship with the owner. Assuming that the owner is not contracted with you to perform continuous on-site construction administration, the AIA documents are fairly open. It's something that you would need to look at and consider early on when you're doing your contract with the owner, but that is one of those points that Jim was mentioning before, where if you had anticipated during your contract negotiation that you were going to visit the site once every other week, let's say, and you get into a situation where because of the schedule or some other reason that you are needing to visit the site more often, then you need to have that conversation with your owner that when we entered into the contract, this is what I base my fee on. This is what we talked about back then. This is what I'm having to do now. This is an additional service, and have that discussion about getting paid for providing those additional services. Jim?
And I agree with all of that, and well said. With the state of North Carolina, for example, their contract review has a clause that goes something like, but no less than once per week, so that they have a way to say that they want you at the site weekly, and often that is sort of what's settled on as a reasonable review. But as Doug said, it absolutely depends on what's happening on the job. And I think in most cases, North Carolina has looked at that and said, it averages out to once a week. You may have to make a lot of foundation pour observations when the foundation is being placed, but you're not out there every day when they're grading the site, so that's not necessary. So it really does depend. Matthew, you keep going.
Alrighty, next question we have here. For on-site meetings, sometimes there's a contractor meeting and a separate owner's meeting. Should the CAs be part of both of those meetings?
Great question. Doug, you go ahead.
I was going to say you probably want to define that in your contract up front as well, and to see what you have agreed to. I don't know. I've done a job where I've had a meeting with the contractor and then had a separate meeting with the owner. That's a new one on me. I have not experienced that. It's typically the owner, contractor, and design team meeting together. I have seen where the contractor may have a meeting with his subcontractors separate. But I think in most cases, you would want all three parties together so that you can resolve issues and have discussions and not have to talk to the contractor and then turn around and have the same discussion with the owner. And then based on the input from the owner, and then you got to go back and have another follow-up conversation with the contractor. It just makes sense to do it all at one time.
Yeah, I agree. Are there more, Matthew?
Alrighty, we are getting to the bottom here. There's two questions related to, well, I guess a comment and then a question related to minutes, going back to that previous question. Daniel recommends that oftentimes there are topics are discussed, but no real decision has been made, and he suggests having at least some form of an action item attached to each minute item, so then there's a verification that the topic was at least discussed. And following on that, Ken is asking, how quickly should meeting minutes be issued following a meeting, either in the field or in the office?
I think action items, and Jim, I'm jumping in here. I think action items are a good idea to note in meeting minutes. I've seen it done several ways, and I think that's just a personal preference, but I think it is good to identify who has an item that they need to respond to and then when they need to respond to it by. That's a part of planning, and it helps the process move along.
And it does, let me interrupt just for 1 second, and it absolutely is critical, because when you start doing that, you will find all of a sudden that somebody's going to say, I didn't know you expected me to do that. I didn't know I was supposed to answer that. So that's a really critical point you just made, and very helpful when you do list that information. It's very clear who's being waited on if an answer isn't coming. I think it's a great tool. Sorry, Doug, I just wanted to throw that in.
Oh, that's fine. And as far as how soon after, I think as soon as possible. If you can get them out the same day, that would be great. But I would say no more than 3 days should pass before you actually have issued out the meeting minutes.
Alrighty, I'm going to do a few more here, and then we're going to probably just try to wrap up today's session. Kevin Hopkins just points in that he likes to add action items into his observation reports, so that's another way we can look at that. Robert comments here, depending on the nature of the project, it may be best to have a discussion with E&O carrier. And then lastly, a comment here from Raul Hernandez saying, in reference to pay apps, we always ask for a draft before the signed copy is issued, so make adjustments in a timely manner.
That's a great point, and that is absolutely a wonderful way to review a pay application, to walk the job with the project manager, the superintendent, yourself, perhaps the owner, perhaps not, and do that draft, that pencil copy review, so that there aren't any surprises when they come in, and make that agreement that that's the way, when they leave the site, it doesn't matter what shows up on their desk when they're preparing that final document. You've agreed to it at the job, and it makes it go much smoother. You're right. Well, Matthew, if there aren't any others, go ahead and skip that slide and skip the next slide, and let's stop on the one that says closeout. There you go, right there. Uh-oh. I don't know what happened to the print there. Sorry, y'all. But one of the things that is also an opportunity, we've talked about action in the office, we've talked about action in the field, and this is just to touch on some action at the end of the project. First of all, you want to be sure that you've communicated frequently and that you have managed your owner's expectations. This has gone on way before this point, but it's a confirmation that you have done so. That they aren't surprised. That they are seeing what they expected to see, and there's some opportunities to participate here in the end, whether it's in the training and educating of those end users, or where you're just going through the steps in the process to transition from the team to the owner. This relates to the marketing effort at the end to keep the client that you currently have, and to finish up with a positive feeling of how things have gone on the job. And just touching on this last one here in your process and procedures in your firm, that you have a feedback process to openly and candidly ask how you did and how you can learn and grow from that moving forward into the next job. These are opportunities to market that long-term relationship that you're building with this person that you've just gone through this complicated procedure with. So don't overlook that opportunity to add to the wealth of your firm. Doug, any comments to that?
Jim, I think you covered that.
Oh, just checking. Douglas and Jim, did we lose you?
Sorry, I was on mute.
No problem.
That's my fault. Sorry, Matthew. So I was just saying Doug and I both believe it's like a cab ride connecting 2 points in the straightest direction. If you've communicated, you've dealt and been proactive in dealing directly with issues and communicating with your owner, you've done all you can do to hold your cost to a minimum in your firm, and have the opportunity to have made more money and retained it there, which is the easiest money to make. So I'll stop with that and let Doug take us to a close with Matthew.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Again, we will be back next month, April 26th, and we'll do best practice number 6. Admitting mistakes is ethically sound, but not what the risk management folks might suggest. So we'll talk about that next time, and hope to have you back, and appreciate you joining us, and certainly appreciate all the questions and input today. It seems to enhance the discussions when we get a lot of feedback from everyone.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you again, Douglas and Jim, for today's session, and thank you all for those that attended. As you see on the screen here, there is Jim and Douglas's email there. Feel free to email them with your additional thoughts, comments, or questions from today's session, or if maybe you have some ideas for future sessions. Once we get done with this top 10 list, we're always looking for new ideas and things to talk about. So feel free to reach out to them as well. With that, again, thank you, Douglas and Jim. Thank you to everybody, and we look forward to seeing you in next month's call. Bye, everyone.